A 5-year-old girl saved a Hell's Angel president from a military-grade bomb, but when Child Protective Services arrived, they didn't thank her. What they tried to do was most grievous, unheard of, and split a family apart for over 15 years. What happened next would expose the dark truth about who really protects American families when the system fails. Hey, real quick before we jump into this story, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where all my riders and supporters are tuning in from across this country. And if you believe in stories about real brotherhood, about bikers who stand up when everyone else walks away, hit that subscribe button right now. Now let's get into the story. The midday sun hammered down on the cracked asphalt outside Rosie's Stop, a weathered diner off Highway 99 in Bakersfield, California. The kind of place where truckers grabbed coffee and bikers stretched their legs between long rides through the Central Valley. Tony Gates had pulled his Harley into the lot 20 minutes earlier, boots hitting the ground with the heavy certainty of a man who'd survived 3 tours in Kandahar and 15 years wearing the patch of the Hells Angels Nomads chapter. His cut, the leather vest that meant everything to those who understood, bore the winged death's head, and beneath it patches that told stories most civilians would never comprehend. The 22 on his collar wasn't a number, it was a reminder. 22 veterans a day, brothers who didn't make it home from the war inside their heads. He didn't notice the rusting Toyota Corolla parked 3 spaces down. Didn't see the small face pressed against the rear window, watching him with eyes too wide for a child her age. 5 years old, and Barbara Hayes had already learned that the world was divided into people who helped and people who hurt. She'd been watching the parking lot for 30 minutes while her mother, Sarah, worked a double shift inside, scrubbing dishes for $7 an hour and pretending the tips would be enough to keep the lights on this month. But Barbara wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the man in the black hoodie she'd seen 10 minutes ago, the man who'd crouched beside the big motorcycle and attached something underneath it, something with wires. Tony swung his leg over the Harley, settling his weight. His hand reached for the ignition. And that's when the car door flew open and a tiny girl came sprinting across the lot, her voice cutting through the heat like a siren. "Don't start the engine!" She was screaming it, her small body launching toward him with a desperation that stopped his hand mid-turn. "Don't start it! The bad man put a box on it!" Tony's combat instincts kicked in before his brain caught up. He was off the bike in a heartbeat, hands catching the little girl before she could slam into the chassis. "Whoa, whoa! What bad man?" His voice was rough, but his grip was gentle. She was shaking, her fingers clutching at his leather vest. And when she looked up at him, he saw it. Real terror. Not the kind kids fake. The kind that comes from seeing something that registers as wrong even when you don't have the words for it yet. He put a black box under your motorcycle," Barbara stammered, her chest heaving. "He had wires, and he kept looking around like he didn't want anyone to see." Tony's blood went cold. He set her down carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the knife on his belt as he crouched beside his bike. And there it was, military-grade C4, enough to turn him and half the parking lot into pink mist, the Baja Cartel. They'd been gunning for him since he'd helped law enforcement shut down their meth pipeline through Kern County 3 months back. He'd known retaliation was coming. He just hadn't expected it here. Hadn't expected a 5-year-old girl to be the one standing between him and a closed casket. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. He pulled his phone, dialed 911, his voice steady even though his heart was hammering. "This is Tony Gates. I've got a vehicle-borne IED at Rosie's stop off 99. Military explosive. I need bomb squad, and I need it now. He gave the coordinates, then turned back to the girl who was still staring at him with those huge, unblinking eyes. You just saved my life, little one. What's your name? Barbara. Her voice was barely a whisper now. My mommy works inside. Within 12 minutes, the lot was swarming. Police cruisers, fire trucks, the bomb squad rolling in with their heavy gear and robotic equipment. They cleared the diner, pushed the perimeter back, and for 45 minutes, Tony stood with his arm around Barbara's shoulders while they dismantled the device that would have made his mother bury whatever pieces they could scrape off the asphalt. The lead officer, a grizzled sergeant named Diaz, who'd worked gang task force for 2 decades, shook Tony's hand when it was over. That's a guardian angel you got there, Gates, Diaz said, nodding toward Barbara. We're gonna need statements, but hell, you'd be dead without her. Sarah Hayes came running out of the diner, her apron still tied around her waist, her face drained of color. Barbara? Baby, what happened? She dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms, and Tony stepped back, watching the reunion with something tight in his chest. The mom was young, maybe 26, 27, with the kind of exhaustion in her eyes that came from working 3 jobs and still coming up short. Her hands were raw from dish soap, her shoes were held together with duct tape. And when she looked up at him, there was gratitude and fear in equal measure. She's a hero, ma'am, Tony said quietly. She saved my life. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she'd gotten out of the car. Don't apologize. Tony's voice was firm. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. But then another vehicle pulled up, a pristine white sedan with state plates. And when the door opened, Tony felt his jaw tighten. He knew that walk, that clipboard, that look of cold judgment that came standard issue with people who worked for Child Protective Services. The woman who stepped out was in her 50s, with a tailored blazer and an expression that said she'd already made up her mind about everyone here before she'd even arrived. Mrs. Vance. Tony had heard about her from brothers in the club who'd tangled with the system. She had a reputation, and she was walking straight towards Sarah and Barbara like a hunter who'd just spotted prey. Mrs. Vance didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask if anyone was hurt. She walked straight past the police tape, clipboard clutched like a weapon, her heels clicking against the asphalt with the rhythm of a countdown timer. Tony watched her eyes scan the scene, the bomb squad packing up their gear, the bikers standing in a loose semicircle, the little girl still clinging to her mother's hand. And he saw the exact moment Vance made her assessment. Guilty until proven innocent. That's how the system worked when you were poor in America. When you worked at a truck stop diner and your car had duct tape holding the bumper on. When your daughter's shoes came from Goodwill and your address was in the wrong zip code. Mrs. Hayes? Vance's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. Sarah stood slowly, instinctively pulling Barbara behind her. Yes? The CPS agent didn't smile. I'm Mrs. Vance with Child Protective Services. I need to ask you some questions about why your daughter was present at what appears to be a cartel bombing attempt. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Tony felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this before, watched the state tear families apart because poverty looked like neglect to people who'd never missed a meal. Sarah's voice shook when she answered. I was working inside. She was supposed to stay in the car. The doors were locked. But she didn't stay in the car, did she? Vance scribbled something on her clipboard. She was running through an active crime scene, near a motorcycle gang. The way she said gang made it sound like a disease. Tony stepped forward, his shadow falling across Vance's clipboard. That motorcycle club just had their president saved by that little girl, and we're veterans. Served our country so people like you could stand here and judge us. Vance looked up at him, her expression unchanged. Mr. Gates, I understand you're grateful, but this child was endangered by her environment. I have a responsibility. Your responsibility? Tony's voice dropped to a growl that made even Diaz, the police sergeant, take a step back. Your responsibility is to protect kids, not punish their mothers for being poor, not rip families apart because you don't like the neighborhood. But Vance was already reaching for Sarah's arm, her fingers closing around the younger woman's wrist. Mrs. Hayes, I'm placing Barbara in protective custody pending an investigation into... Tony's hand landed on Vance's shoulder, not rough, but immovable, the kind of grip that said you're not taking another step. She ain't going nowhere with you. And that's when the cameras started rolling. The video went viral in 4 hours. Someone's cell phone had caught the whole thing. Tony Gates, 6'4" and 240 pounds of tattooed muscle, standing between a terrified mother and a government agent who thought a clipboard gave her the right to destroy lives. The caption read, Hell's Angel stops CPS from taking hero girl who saved his life. It had 3 million views by midnight. Comments flooded in. Some called Tony a thug, others called him a guardian angel. But the one that mattered most came from an account with a blue check mark and the American flag in the bio. Richard Sterling, councilman, future congressional candidate. And according to the birth certificate Sarah kept in a manila envelope under her mattress, Barbara's biological father. He hadn't seen his daughter since the day she was born, hadn't sent a check, hadn't called, hadn't acknowledged her existence when he was kissing babies and shaking hands at county fairs across Kern County. But now, with the cameras watching, Richard Sterling saw an opportunity. His press conference was scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning outside the Bakersfield City Hall. He stood at a podium in a $5,000 suit, his smile practiced, and his words carefully chosen by a PR team that understood how to weaponize a father's love. I've recently become aware, Sterling began, his voice heavy with manufactured emotion, that my daughter, my little girl, has been living in dangerous circumstances. Circumstances that nearly cost her life yesterday. He paused, letting the camera zoom in on the single tear he'd managed to produce. I was young and foolish when Barbara was born. I made mistakes. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm a father who wants to do right by his child, and I will not stand by while she's kept in an environment where biker gangs and drug cartels threaten her safety. The reporters ate it up. Questions flew like bullets. Would he seek custody? Was he blaming the mother? What about the Hells Angels? Sterling raised his hands, playing the role of reluctant hero. I'm filing for full custody, not to punish anyone, but to give my daughter the life she deserves, safety, stability, a father who can protect her. What he didn't say was that his polling numbers had dropped 6 points last month, that his opponent was gaining ground with family values voters, that a heartwarming story about a reformed politician rescuing his endangered daughter could swing the entire election. Back at the clubhouse in Oildale, Tony watched the press conference on a phone someone had shoved in his face. His brothers stood around him, Reaper, Hangman, Nomad, men who'd bled together in Fallujah and Helmand province before they'd ever worn the patch. Men who understood that the system wasn't built for people like them. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat on 3 acres of hard dirt outside Oildale, a neighborhood north of Bakersfield where people minded their own business, and the law showed up only when absolutely necessary. The building itself was concrete block and corrugated steel, American flags hanging beside the club colors, security cameras covering every angle. To most people, it looked like a fortress. To Sarah and Barbara, it looked like salvation. Tony had made the offer at 2 in the morning, standing outside the motel where Sarah had been crashing for 3 weeks since the landlord had padlocked her apartment. "You can't go back there," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sterling's got lawyers. CPS is watching. The Baja Cartel's still out there. You need protection, and the system sure as hell ain't gonna give it to you." Sarah had stared at him like he was offering her the moon. We can't stay with bikers. The judge will..." "The judge is already against you." Tony had cut her off gently. "You're poor. You work at a diner. Your baby daddy's a politician with deep pockets. You think the system's gonna be fair? It ain't built for fair. It's built for people with money." He'd crouched down to Barbara's eye level then, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. "You trust me, little one?" Barbara had nodded without hesitation. Kids knew things adults forgot. They could smell danger and safety in ways that had nothing to do with appearances. And Tony Gates, for all his scars and patches, felt safe. The clubhouse was nothing like Sarah expected. Yes, there were motorcycles lined up like soldiers. Yes, there were men covered in tattoos and leather. But there was also a kitchen where Reaper's old lady, Maria, was making tamales for Sunday dinner. There was a corner where Hangman's kids were doing homework at a battered table. There were photos on the walls, brothers in uniform, brothers in caskets, brothers holding newborns. This wasn't a gang. It was a family forged in fire. Tony had given them the back room, the one he usually reserved for brothers passing through on long rides. He'd brought in clean sheets, stuffed animals his own daughter had once loved, a nightlight shaped like a motorcycle. And when Barbara had asked where her teddy bear was, the ratty brown bear she'd slept with every night of her life, Tony had seen the pain crack across her small face. "It's still in the car," Sarah had whispered. "The police impounded it." Tony had stood there for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he'd grabbed his keys. "I'll get it." Maria had caught his arm. "Hermano, the car's in the police lot. They've got it tagged as evidence." Tony had looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death to be afraid of anything the state could throw at him. "That little girl just lost everything because she saved my life. I ain't letting her lose that bear too." Chapter 5. The Teddy Bear Mission. The Bakersfield police impound lot sat behind a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire on the eastern edge of town, where the refineries pumped smoke into the sky and the air tasted like crude oil and broken promises. Tony rolled up at 3 in the morning, the Harley's engine cutting through the silence like a prayer. He'd done reconnaissance earlier, 2 guards, rotating shifts every 4 hours, cameras covering the main gate but blind spots along the back fence line where the irrigation ditch ran parallel to the property. This wasn't his first time moving through hostile territory. He killed the engine 2 blocks out, walked the rest of the way in the shadows, his cut tucked into a backpack so the patches wouldn't give him away. The fence was easy. Wire cutters made quick work of the chain link near the ditch where the ground was soft and the cameras didn't reach. He slipped through like smoke, staying low, moving between wrecked vehicles that told stories of DUIs and domestic violence calls and dreams that had died on California highways. Sarah's Toyota was in the back row, still covered in fingerprint dust from the bomb squad's investigation. The doors were unlocked. Cops didn't worry much about security for a car that was worth less than the impound fees. Tony pulled the back door open, the hinges groaning, and there it was. Stuffed between the seat and the door panel, one button eye hanging by a thread, fur matted from being clutched by small hands through too many hard nights. He grabbed the bear, held it for a moment against his chest, and felt something crack inside him. His own daughter, Emma, had died 6 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light in Fresno, turned his baby girl into a memory and a gravestone he visited every Sunday. She'd been 7. She'd had a stuffed rabbit named Cotton. And in the weeks after the funeral, when the world had felt like it was ending, Tony had held that rabbit and sobbed into its synthetic fur until his throat was raw. He'd told himself he'd never care about another kid again, told himself the pain wasn't worth it. But here he was, stealing a teddy bear from a police impound lot because a 5-year-old girl with her mother's eyes had saved his life and deserved to have one thing, just one goddamn thing, that felt like home. The guards never saw him leave. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, Tony was back at the clubhouse, walking into the room where Barbara slept, curled against her mother. He set the bear on the pillow beside her small hand, and when she woke up 20 minutes later and saw it, the smile that lit her face was worth every risk he'd taken. The Kern County Family Court building squatted on Truxton Avenue like a monument to broken dreams, its brutalist concrete architecture reflecting the cold efficiency of a system that processed human lives like paperwork. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday that felt like Judgment Day. Sarah sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed dress, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them in her lap. Beside her was a public defender named Rodriguez, who'd been assigned to her case 3 days ago and looked like he'd already given up. Across the aisle sat Richard Sterling and his legal team, 3 lawyers in custom suits armed with binders and precedent, and the kind of confidence that came from never having lost anything that mattered. Tony wasn't allowed in the courtroom. Associates with criminal organizations was how Sterling's lawyers had phrased it in their motion. So he stood in the hallway with his brothers, hands clenched into fists, waiting. Judge Patricia Harmon entered at 10:03, her black robe swishing, her face carved from granite, and 30 years of family law cases that had taught her to trust money over character. She didn't look at Sarah when she spoke. This court has reviewed the petitions for custody of minor child Barbara Ann Hayes. Mr. Sterling, you're seeking full custody on what grounds? Sterling's lead attorney stood, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. Your Honor, our client has recently become aware of his parental responsibilities and wishes to provide a stable, safe environment for his daughter. The child's current living situation involves documented exposure to gang activity, poverty-level conditions, and an incident involving a cartel bombing attempt. We believe the mother was working, Rodriguez interrupted, standing awkwardly. She's employed. She's never been arrested. She loves her daughter. Love doesn't pay for private schools, Sterling's lawyer shot back. Love doesn't provide security guards or gated communities or protection from the criminal element Mrs. Hayes has chosen to associate with. Judge Harmon's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Counsel, enough. Mrs. Hayes, you're currently residing where? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. With friends, Your Honor. What friends? The Hells Angels Nomads chapter. The courtroom went silent. Judge Harmon leaned forward, her eyes cold. You're living in a motorcycle club? They're protecting us from threats you created by being in the wrong place at the wrong time? The judge's voice carried the weight of a verdict already decided. Mrs. Hayes, I don't doubt you love your daughter, but love isn't enough when a child's safety is at risk. Mr. Sterling has the means to provide security, education, and stability." Rodriguez tried to object, but his voice was drowned out by the gavel. "Temporary custody is awarded to Richard Sterling, pending a full investigation. Supervised visitation for Mrs. Hayes twice weekly, location to be determined by—" Sarah's scream cut through the courtroom like breaking glass. Richard Sterling had never been to a safe house before. The concept seemed almost quaint to him, like something from a mob movie, not something that applied to a city councilman with a security detail and an election to win. But his lawyers had insisted. "The Hells Angels have made threats," they'd said. "The Baja Cartel is still active. Until we establish permanent custody, Barbara needs to be in a secure location." So Sterling had agreed, mostly because it made good press. The safe house was a ranch-style property in the hills east of Bakersfield, surrounded by oak trees and equipped with panic rooms and cameras. Barbara had been transferred there after the hearing, crying for her mother, while a social worker with dead eyes processed paperwork. Sterling had shown up for exactly one visit, a photo op where he'd brought a stuffed unicorn and smiled for the cameras while Barbara refused to look at him. Then he'd left to attend a fundraiser at the Petroleum Club, and he'd done something incredibly stupid. He'd posted on social media, just a casual update, taking time away from the campaign to focus on family. Sometimes the most important work happens at home. Nothing specific, nothing that gave away the location. But the metadata on the photo, the geotag he'd forgotten to disable, told a different story. It took the Baja Cartel 40 minutes to triangulate the property. Carlos El Tigre Mendoza had been tracking Tony Gates for 3 months, ever since Gates had testified before a federal grand jury about the cartel's meth distribution network through Kern County. El Tigre didn't believe in loose ends, and if he couldn't get to Gates directly, he'd burn down everything the biker cared about. The hit team rolled out at dusk, 6 men in 2 vehicles armed with automatic weapons and a grudge that had been simmering since the indictments came down. They had the address. They had the element of surprise. And they had no idea that Tony Gates had been running counter-surveillance on that house since the moment Barbara had been taken there. Tony had installed his own cameras in the trees, had mapped the property from satellite images, had positioned brothers at overlook points with binoculars and radios. Because he'd learned something in 3 tours overseas. You don't wait for the enemy to hit you on their terms. You see them coming, and you hit them first. When the cartel vehicles turned onto the dirt road leading to the safe house, Reaper's voice crackled over the radio. "We got company. 2 vehicles, 6 tangos, armed to the teeth." Tony was already moving, the Harley roaring to life, his brothers falling in behind him like a formation of fighter jets. They'd sworn an oath when they'd earned their patches, no brother left behind, no innocent abandoned. And that little girl in that house, she was under their protection. Sterling's security detail never saw it coming. The first shot shattered the living room window at 7:47 p.m., sending glass exploding across the hardwood floor where Barbara had been coloring with crayons under the watchful eye of a social worker named Janet. The second shot took out the security camera above the front door. By the third shot, Janet was screaming into her phone while Barbara dove under the dining room table, her small body shaking, but her mind eerily calm. She'd seen bad men before. The cartel gunmen spread out with military precision, 2 covering the front entrance, 2 moving around back, 1 staying with the vehicles, 1 advancing toward the side door with a battering ram. They were professionals, efficient, used to soft targets who folded when the bullets started flying. They hadn't counted on the Hells Angels. Tony and his brothers hit the property like a thunderstorm, their bikes screaming up the driveway with headlights blazing and engines roaring loud enough to wake the dead. Reaper came in from the east, his Remington 870 already in his hands. Hangman flanked west, his AR-15 a black extension of his body. Nomad went straight up the middle, his .45 drawn, his eyes cold as winter. And Tony? Tony went through the front door like the wrath of God. The cartel shooter in the foyer turned, his weapon swinging up, but Tony was already inside his reach. The biker's fist connected with the gunman's jaw hard enough to crack bone, sending him sprawling. Tony grabbed the dropped rifle, chambered around, and moved deeper into the house with the kind of muscle memory that came from clearing compounds in Kandahar. "Barbara!" he roared. "Where are you, little one?" "Here." Her voice came from under the table, small but steady. "I'm here." Tony reached her in 3 strides, his body dropping into a crouch. He could hear gunfire outside, his brothers engaging the cartel hitters, the sharp crack of rifles and the deeper boom of shotguns. He could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer but not close enough. And he could hear something else. Footsteps running away from the house. Fast. Panicked. He looked up just in time to see Richard Sterling sprinting across the lawn toward his Mercedes, his expensive shoes slipping on the grass, his face twisted in pure terror. The politician didn't look back, didn't check on his daughter, didn't even hesitate. He just ran, dove into his car, and peeled out of the driveway like the devil himself was chasing him. And maybe he was. Tony turned back to Barbara, his hands gentle as he pulled her out from under the table. "I got you," he said softly. "You're safe. I got—" The bullet punched through his left shoulder from behind, the impact spinning him sideways. Pain exploded white-hot through his body, but his training overrode it. He twisted, using his own body as a shield between Barbara and the cartel shooter who'd come through the back door. The gunman fired again. Tony felt the second bullet tear through his side just above his ribs. But he didn't fall. He couldn't fall. Not while she was still in danger. Reaper appeared behind the shooter like a ghost, his shotgun roaring once. The cartel hitter dropped, and then it was over. Police flooded the property. Paramedics swarmed. Tony collapsed against the wall, blood soaking through his cut, and Barbara crawled into his lap, her small hands pressing against his wounds, like she could hold the life inside him through sheer will. "Don't go," she whispered. "Please don't go like Mama said my daddy did." Tony looked down at her, his vision blurring, and managed to smile. "I ain't going nowhere, little guardian. Brothers don't leave." Tony woke up in Mercy Hospital 40 hours later with 17 stitches in his shoulder, 12 in his side, and a little girl asleep in the chair beside his bed. Barbara was curled up like a comma, one hand still clutching the teddy bear he'd stolen for her, the other reaching out toward his hospital bed like she needed to make sure he was still real. The room was full of flowers, dozens of arrangements sent by people Tony had never met. Bikers from chapters across California, veterans organizations, teachers from Barbara's school, and somehow, impossibly, a handwritten note from Senator Dianne Feinstein that read, "Some heroes don't wear uniforms, they wear cuts. Thank you for your service, both overseas and here at home." The TV mounted on the wall was playing CNN, and Tony's face was everywhere. Someone had leaked the security camera footage from the safe house. All of it. The cartel attack, the Hells Angels response, and most damning of all, Richard Sterling running to his car while gunfire raged and his daughter screamed for help. The internet had done what the court system couldn't. Exposed the truth. Sterling's polling numbers had cratered overnight. His opponent was calling for his resignation. The California bar was investigating his lawyers for misconduct. And most importantly, Sterling himself had withdrawn his custody petition in a statement that reeked of damage control and political calculation. Sarah walked into the room carrying coffee and looking like she'd aged 10 years in 2 days. When she saw Tony was awake, her face crumpled. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You could have died." Tony's voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd pulled that morning. "She saved my life first. I was just returning the favor. She's 5 years old, and she's got more courage than most grown men I know." He tried to sit up, winced, and Sarah moved to help him. "What happens now?" "Now?" Sarah's smile was watery but real. "Now CPS dropped their investigation. The judge recused herself from the case. And we've got a real lawyer, one of yours actually. Man named Mike Raines out of Oakland. He specializes in defending bikers. He's working pro bono. Good man." Tony looked at Barbara, still sleeping. "She can't go back to that motel." "She won't have to." Sarah's voice broke. "Your club. They took up a collection. First and last month's rent on a house in Oildale. 3 bedrooms, fenced yard. They're moving us in this weekend." Tony felt something tighten in his chest. This was what Brotherhood meant. Not the patches or the bikes or the parties. This. Taking care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. Standing between the innocent and the wolves. Building family out of choice instead of blood. Barbara stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw Tony awake, she launched herself at him, careful of his bandages, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "You stayed," she breathed. "You promised, and you stayed." Tony held her, his one good arm pulling her close, and felt the ghosts of his past finally start to quiet. Emma would have liked this little girl, would have called her sister, would have wanted him to be happy again. "I'm not going anywhere," he said into Barbara's hair. "Brothers don't leave. And your family now, you understand? The club doesn't abandon family." 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon that tasted like freedom and smelled like barbecue, the Hells Angels Nomads chapter held a ceremony in their clubhouse yard. 70 bikers stood in formation while Tony Gates placed a small leather vest, a cut made specifically for her, across Barbara's shoulders. On the back, hand-stitched by Maria, were 3 words, "Little Guardian Angel," and beneath them, a new patch, one that had never existed before but would carry forward into history. Honorary member. Family. Sarah stood to the side, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter become part of something bigger than blood. Watching a group of men society called criminals prove that family wasn't about who raised you. It was about who showed up when the bullets started flying. If you believe that family is built by who stands beside you when the shooting starts, not who shares your DNA, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories like this. Stories about the brotherhood most people don't understand. About bikers who prove every day that leather and patches don't make you a criminal. They make you a protector. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you. Stories about veterans who found their true calling on 2 wheels, and brothers who'd die before they'd abandon their own.